In the small border town of Eagle Pass, Texas, the sky stretched endlessly, a wide, blue canvas streaked with migrating birds, shifting clouds, and every so often, the distant thrum of helicopters. To most children, the helicopters were little, more than background noise. To Elena Martinez, they were everything. Elena was 10 years old the first time she saw a Black Hawk flying low over her schoolyard. The other kids pointed and shouted, their excitement fading quickly as the helicopter disappeared beyond the horizon. But Elena didn't move. She stayed rooted in place. Her neck craned, her heart racing as though the massive machine had come just for her. In that moment, she decided, not hoped, not wished, but decided that she would one day be the one at the controls. Her classmates laughed when she said it. "You? Fly that thing?" One boy jeered, tossing a crumpled paper ball at her desk. "Girls can't fly Black Hawks. That's soldier stuff." Even the teacher smiled gently and tried to steer her toward more practical dreams, suggesting maybe she'd make a fine nurse or teacher someday. But Elena didn't let their doubts sink in. She simply folded her arms across her chest and repeated the same words every time. "One day, I'll fly one of those." At home, Elena's world wasn't much easier. Her father, a hard-working mechanic, believed in discipline and practicality. He didn't have much patience for wild dreams. When Elena once pointed at a picture of a helicopter in a magazine and said, "I'm going to fly one," he chuckled. "Mia, those things cost more than our whole street. Leave that to the army men. You focus on school." Her mother, however, saw the spark in her daughter's eyes. She never told Elena to stop dreaming, even if she didn't fully understand. Instead, she found old library books about aviation and brought them home, sliding them across the dinner table with a quiet smile. Elena devoured them like they were treasure. She traced diagrams of rotor blades, underlined words she didn't understand, and looked them up in dictionaries until they became part of her vocabulary. Every night, after homework and chores, Elena would sit on the roof of their small house. She would lie back, watching the stars until she fell asleep. Sometimes, if she was lucky, a helicopter would cut across the night sky. Her friends called her strange for spending so much time staring upward, but Elena didn't care. The sky felt like hers. School, however, was a different story. Elena wasn't a troublemaker, but she often found herself isolated. At recess, when others played kickball, she'd be sketching helicopters in her notebook, labeling parts she had memorized from her aviation books. She knew the difference between a rotor mast and a swashplate before she even hit high school. Her peers, unable to understand her obsession, teased her. "Martinez thinks she's going to be a soldier," they would chant, laughing. But Elena had an answer for everything. Once, when a boy sneered, "You're too small to even reach." "The pedals," she shot back without hesitation. "That's why I'll train harder." Another time, when a girl asked sarcastically, "What if they don't let girls fly?" Elena looked her straight in the eye and said, "Then I'll be the first." Her stubbornness was both her greatest strength and her biggest shield. Deep down, she sometimes wondered if the others were right. She was small, she was young, and no one in her family had ever been in the military. But every doubt was met with a stronger voice inside her, the voice that whispered, "Keep looking up. You'll get there." By middle school, Elena's room had become a shrine to helicopters. Posters lined her walls. Black Hawks, Apaches, Chinooks. Her notebooks were filled not with doodles of celebrities or song lyrics, but with diagrams of engines and sketches of cockpits. When other kids saved their allowance for new shoes or gadgets, Elena saved hers to buy model helicopters. She built them piece by piece, sometimes staying up past midnight to finish a rotor assembly. Each time she placed a finished model on her shelf, she whispered to herself, one step closer. Her mother often worried about how lonely she seemed. "Mia," she would say, sitting beside her on the bed, "you don't always have to prove yourself to everyone. You're enough." But Elena wasn't chasing approval. She was chasing a future. The turning point came during a school career day. Each student was asked to stand up and share what they wanted to be. Most answers were predictable: teacher, doctor, soccer player. When it was Elena's turn, she stood tall and said, "I want to fly a Black Hawk helicopter." The room erupted in laughter. Some students clapped mockingly. Others exchanged knowing glances. Even the teacher paused, unsure how to respond. "That's ambitious," she finally said, trying to sound encouraging. Alana sat back down, her cheeks burning, but she didn't cry. Instead, she opened her notebook and drew a black hawk, bolder and darker than any sketch before. The laughter only deepened her resolve. By the time she reached high school, Elena had learned to channel her obsession into action. She joined the junior ROTC program, where she excelled in drills and discipline. Her instructors noticed her intensity, though some still doubted her focus on aviation. "It's good to dream," one sergeant told her, "but don't be disappointed if it doesn't happen." Elena only nodded. Inside, she thought, "Watch me." Her nights were still filled with books and sketches, but now she added physical training. She woke at dawn to run laps before school, building the stamina she knew a pilot would need. She pushed herself in ways her peers couldn't understand. While they prepared for prom, Elena was preparing for boot camp. Through it all, she carried the memory of that first Black Hawk she saw at age 10. She could still feel the vibration in her chest, still see the way it cut through the air like a blade. That moment had etched itself into her soul, becoming the compass guiding her forward. People mocked her. Teachers doubted her. Even family questioned her. But Elena never stopped looking up, because deep down, she believed the sky was waiting. The first morning Elena Martinez stood in army fatigues, she felt like she had stepped into another world. The scent of dust, sweat, and machine oil hung heavy in the air. Drill sergeants barked orders with voices that cracked like whips. Rows of recruits, stiff-backed and wide-eyed, shuffled into formation, each one trying to hide their nerves under a mask of determination. Elena wasn't hiding hers. She stood with her chin high, shoulders squared, and eyes locked forward. She had fought too long for this chance to shrink now. Every late night studying flight manuals, every morning jog before school, every whispered promise to herself beneath the stars had led her here. But it didn't take long for the doubts to start. The first came from her peers. During introductions, on the barracks bunks, each recruit bragged about their goals: infantry, intelligence, engineering. When it was Elena's turn, she said it as she always did: "I'm here to fly a Black Hawk." The laughter was instant. One recruit, a tall man from Georgia, nearly fell off his bunk laughing. "Girl, you can't be serious. You've been watching too many movies." Another shook his head, smirking. "Do you even know how heavy those things are? You think it's like driving a car?" Elena didn't flinch. She met their laughter with silence, but inside, fire sparked. This wasn't new. She had lived with mockery her whole life. But here, the sting was sharper. These weren't children on a playground. These were soldiers, the very people she would one day have to prove herself to. The second doubt came from authority. During a routine fitness drill, Elena pushed herself through grueling obstacle courses, her small frame darting over walls and crawling through mud. She finished among the first group, panting but proud. Yet when Sergeant Hollister, a grizzled veteran with a scar across his cheek, reviewed her performance, his feedback cut deep. "Martinez," he said, squinting at his clipboard, "you're quick, tough too. But let's be real, you'll never be piloting a Black Hawk. That's a man's seat. Best case, you'll run support or logistics. Some recruits snickered, nodding as if his word were law. Alana's jaw tightened, but she bit back a reply. Inside, her blood boiled. A man's seat? Watch me. The third doubt was her own. Late at night, after lights out, Elena lay awake on her bunk, staring at the ceiling. Her muscles ached, her uniform still smelled of sweat, and her mind replayed the day's insults. What if they were right? What if she was chasing something impossible? She was small. She was young. She was one of the few women in her unit. Maybe the Black Hawk really was out of reach. But then she remembered her mother slipping books across the dinner table, the feel of model helicopter pieces clicking into place, the memory of that first Black Hawk thundering over her schoolyard. Those memories weren't just dreams, they were roots, anchors. And every time she closed her eyes, she saw herself in the pilot's seat, hands steady on the controls, blades slicing the air. So when the morning whistle blew, Elena was the first to rise. Day after day, she fought to prove she belonged. On the rifle range, she fired with precision until even her skeptics fell silent. On the obstacle course, she finished near the front, mud streaking her face, but her chin lifted high. In tactical drills, she outlasted recruits twice her size, her endurance born from years of training alone at dawn. But still, the whispers followed her. She's book smart, not field smart. She'll never make it to a cockpit. She's tough, but she's not Black Hawk tough. The turning point came during a classroom session on aviation basics. The instructor projected diagrams of helicopter systems onto the board, explaining the functions of the swash plate and rotor mast. Most recruits scribbled notes hurriedly, confused by the complexity. Elena didn't write a word. She raised her hand. Sir, she said, her voice steady, the diagram is missing the anti-torque pedals. Without them, you can't counteract. The yaw from the main rotor. The room went silent. The instructor paused, eyebrows raised. Then he smiled faintly. Correct, Martinez. Seems you've done your homework. The recruits glanced at each other. Some rolled their eyes, annoyed. Others looked at her with a mix of surprise and irritation. But Elena didn't care. She wasn't there to impress them. She was there to prepare. And still, the mockery continued. One evening in the mess hall, a group of recruits cornered her. At a table. So Martinez, one drawled, smirking, when you're done playing pilot, what's your backup plan? Clerk? Medic? Cooking in the mess? Elena looked up from her tray, her eyes cold. My backup plan, she said slowly, is to fly it better than you ever could. The table went quiet. A few laughed nervously, but the seed was planted. Elena wasn't just stubborn, she was dangerous in her certainty. Yet even with her growing confidence, doubt from authority lingered. Instructors often praised her discipline, but cautioned her against setting unrealistic expectations. Some subtly suggested she consider other paths, hinting that aviation slots were limited and competitive. One even said bluntly, Martinez, you're tough, but the Army isn't about proving points. Don't waste time chasing something that won't happen. But Elena refused to bend. At night, she returned to her old habit, staying up late with manuals. She pored over schematics, memorized controls, and ran through flight procedures in her head until she could recite them in her sleep. She volunteered for every extra training session, no matter how grueling. She didn't just want to be ready, she wanted the undeniable. Her persistence began to show. During a simulation exercise, where recruits practiced decision-making, under pressure, Elena performed flawlessly. While others panicked or froze, she kept her cool, giving precise commands and navigating the scenario with clarity. Her evaluator wrote one word in the margin of her file, pilot. Still, the mockery. didn't vanish. "Martinez thinks she's Top Gun," one recruit joked. "Better watch out, she might try to fly your car." Elena learned to ignore it. But deep inside, she stored every insult like fuel. She didn't want an apology. She didn't want validation. She wanted the day to come when their laughter turned to silence. And she knew it would. Because beneath the uniform, beneath the sweat and the bruises, beneath the doubts of others and her own flickers of fear, Elena carried something none of them did. The unshakable certainty of a child who once looked up at the sky and said, "One day I'll fly." That. The army days were long, but Elena's nights were longer. When the other recruits collapsed onto their bunks, groaning about sore muscles and aching feet, Elena pulled out her manuals. The barracks were dimly lit, the fluorescent bulbs buzzing faintly overhead, but she didn't need brightness. She needed focus. Her flashlight beam skimmed over pages, filled with diagrams of rotor systems, hydraulic controls, emergency checklists. Her bunkmates thought she was insane. "Martinez," one muttered one evening, rolling over with a groan. "Lights out means lights out. What are you even doing? That thing reads like a phone book." Elena didn't look up. Her finger traced the outline of a control panel as she whispered the sequence of startup procedures under her breath. Master battery on. Fuel pumps. Auxiliary power unit. She didn't just want to know the steps. She wanted them burned into her memory until she could recite them while half asleep under pressure with lives depending on it. To her, every extra hour was an investment. To them, it was madness. But she didn't care. During the day, she worked as hard as anyone else harder, in fact. But it was at night, when the barracks fell silent and only the distant hum of generators filled the air, that Elena's transformation truly took place. Those nights turned her from an eager recruit into something sharper, hungrier. She built her own routine. After evening drills and dinner, while others unwound with card games, chatter, or letters from home, she would slip into a corner with her books. Her desk was a clutter of notes, hand-drawn diagrams, and checklists she wrote out again and again until their handwriting blurred. At first, the other recruits laughed. "Look at Martinez, acting like she's already a pilot," one said, tossing a pillow at her desk. "She probably dreams about helicopters," another snickered. Elena didn't deny it. She did dream about helicopters, except for her. The dream was also practice. In her sleep, she rehearsed takeoffs and landings, emergency procedures, auto rotations. She would wake with her heart racing, as if the blades were still thundering in her chest. Even her instructors noticed her strange dedication. One evening, Sergeant Hollister passed by the barracks and caught her hunched over a manual, lips moving as she muttered sequences. He raised an eyebrow. "You studying for a test nobody told me about?" he asked dryly. Elena straightened, snapping the book shut. "Just keeping sharp, Sergeant." He studied her for a long moment, then gave a slight nod. "Don't burn yourself out. Obsession's a double-edged sword." But Elena didn't see it as obsession. To her, it was survival. She knew slots for aviation training were limited, fiercely competitive. She couldn't just be good, she had to be undeniable. Her preparation wasn't just academic. She pushed her body to match her mind. After lights out, when the others were asleep, she sometimes slipped out to the empty training yard. In the moonlight, she ran drills, practiced climbing ropes, or did push-ups until her arms trembled. She imagined herself in a cockpit, every bead of sweat, one more ounce of strength she would need to hold steady against the helicopter's controls. Sometimes she doubted herself. Alone in the quiet of the barracks, fatigue pressing on her bones, she would stare at the pages of her manual until the words blurred. Was she really cut out for this? Could one stubborn girl from a forgotten Texas town truly claim a seat that even many men couldn't earn? But every doubt was answered by discipline. When her body screamed for rest, she whispered to herself, "One more page, one more push-up, one more rep." What kept her going wasn't just ambition. It was the memory of every laugh, every smirk, every voice that told her she couldn't. She carried those voices with her like weights on her back, training under their pressure until she grew strong enough to shrug them off. The nights shaped her. By the time her peers were half asleep in morning classes, Elena's mind was sharp from hours of pre-dawn study. She knew procedures others hadn't even glanced at yet. She could explain hydraulic failures, tail rotor malfunctions, and emergency landings in precise detail. Her instructors began to notice. "Martinez," one lieutenant remarked during a systems lesson, "you seem to know this material already." "Yes, sir," she replied simply, hiding the fact that she had already memorized the entire chapter weeks earlier. Her peers hated it. Some muttered that she was a show-off, others that she was trying too hard. "You're making the rest of us look bad," one snapped after class. Elena only shrugged. She wasn't competing with them. She was competing with her own limits. Still, the mockery continued. In the mess hall, they'd imitate her muttering, pretending to flip through imaginary manuals. In the barracks, they teased her for being married to her books. But Elena had long ago learned the power of silence. She let their jokes roll off her, saving her words for the moments that mattered. It wasn't all ridicule, though. Slowly, a few began to respect her. A recruit struggling with mechanical theory once approached her quietly after class. "Hey, Martinez," he said, scratching the back of his neck. "You, think you could explain that swashplate thing again?" Elena smiled. "Sure. Sit down." Soon, she became the unofficial tutor, helping others understand concepts she had mastered. For the first time, her obsession wasn't just isolating her, it was lifting others too. But still, she felt the weight of expectation pressing heavier with every passing day. The more she knew, the more she realized how high the climb would be. Helicopter training wasn't guaranteed. Only a handful would make it. She had to be ready, not just to meet the standard, but to shatter it. So she doubled down. Her nights grew longer, her notes thicker, her arms and legs stronger. She pushed herself past exhaustion, knowing that somewhere, out there, a Black Hawk waited for her hands on its controls. One night, as she sat alone in the barracks, tracing a diagram of a rotor system, she caught her reflection in the darkened window. For a moment, she didn't see a tired recruit scribbling notes. She saw a pilot, her hair tucked under a helmet, her eyes steady, her hands gripping the cyclic and collective with absolute control. The vision lasted only a second, but it was enough. She closed the manual, leaned back, and whispered into the quiet room. One day. And with that, she flipped the book open again. The others dreamed in their sleep. Elena dreamed with her eyes open, in the hours no one else was willing to give. And those nights, the endless grinding nights, were forging her into the kind of soldier who could one day sit in a cockpit and say with absolute certainty, "I can fly it." The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, an ocean of sand shimmering under the Arizona sun. Heat waves rippled upward, distorting the horizon until the mountains looked like ghosts. On the flight line, the Black Hawk stood waiting, a dark, hulking shape against the pale earth. Its rotors hung still, blades stretching wide, like the wings of a beast at rest. Elena Martinez stood at its side, helmet in hand, heart pounding hard enough to shake her ribs. This was it. For years she had studied manuals, memorized diagrams, practiced in simulators, until her fingers twitched in her sleep. But nothing not the books, not the late-night study sessions, not even the endless drills could prepare her for the moment when she would sit inside the machine she had dreamed about since she was 10 years old. Her instructor, Chief Warrant Officer Daniels, a broad-shouldered veteran with 20 years in the cockpit, looked her over. His expression was unreadable behind dark aviator sunglasses. "You nervous, Martinez?" She swallowed. "No, sir." It was a lie. Her stomach churned like it was full of stones. Daniels gave a faint smirk. "Good. Means you're paying attention. Anyone who says they're not nervous the first time is either lying or too stupid to know better." The other trainees stood nearby, watching. A few muttered to each other. Elena didn't need to hear the words to know what they were saying. She's not ready. She's going to mess this up. She thinks she's better than us, but she'll crash before she even takes off. Elena tightened her grip on the helmet and stepped toward the cockpit. Climbing inside was like stepping into another world. The cabin smelled of oil, fuel, and sun-baked metal. The seat was warm, molded to the shape of countless pilots before her. The control stick rose between her knees. The collective lever to her left. Panels of switches and dials surrounded her like a wall of secrets she had spent years trying to decode. Her hands trembled as she strapped herself in. Daniels climbed into the co-pilot's seat. "All right, Martinez. Let's see what you've got. Go through the pre-flight." Her throat was dry, but her voice was steady. She began the checklist. Master battery on. Fuel pumps on. APU start. Her fingers moved with precision, muscle memory kicking in from all those nights muttering procedures under her breath. Daniels watched quietly, offering no help, no corrections. Outside, the other trainees shaded their eyes, waiting. The auxiliary power unit whined to life. A deep vibration filled the cabin. Elena's pulse raced to match it. "Main engine start," Daniel said. Elena flipped the switch. The Black Hawk roared awake. The twin engines spooled up, the rotors beginning to turn, slow at first, then faster, until the entire machine trembled with raw power. Dust swirled across the desert floor. Elena felt it in her bones, the weight, the strength, the sheer life of the helicopter coming alive beneath her. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. Daniels leaned back, arms crossed. "All right, Martinez. Take her up." Her heart stopped. "Sir? You heard me. Collective up. Let's see if you can get this bird off the ground." Her mouth was dry, her palms slick with sweat. She'd practiced this 1,000 times in a simulator, but this wasn't a simulation. This was real. The blades above her weren't pixels on a screen. They could kill her with one wrong move. "You don't belong here," the voice whispered in her head. It sounded like the recruits who laughed at her, the instructors who doubted her, the classmates back home who mocked her dream. "You'll crash. You'll prove them all right." But then another voice came, the voice that had kept her awake at night, flipping through manuals, the one that whispered beneath the stars, "One day, I'll fly it." Elena tightened her grip on the controls. She eased the collective upward. The Black Hawk shuddered. The ground blurred beneath her. For a terrifying second, she thought she had lost it, that the helicopter would tip and crash. But she steadied her hand, countered with the pedals, adjusted the cyclic. The machine responded. The Black Hawk lifted into the air. The desert dropped. Away. The world opened beneath her. For the first time in her life, Elena wasn't looking up at the helicopter. She was inside it. Her chest filled with something she couldn't describe, mixture of fear, joy, and fierce vindication. She held the machine steady, hovering 10 feet off the ground. Dust whipped around them, sunlight glinting off the rotors. Daniel said nothing for a long moment. Then, finally, "Not bad, Martinez. Not bad at all." Her throat tightened. She wanted to smile, but she couldn't afford to lose focus. "All right," Daniels continued. "Take her forward. Gentle on the cyclic. Small movements." She nodded, though her mouth was too dry to speak. She nudged the stick. The helicopter eased forward, the ground sliding beneath them. She adjusted, with the pedals keeping it straight. Every nerve in her body was on fire, every muscle tuned to the machine. Daniels guided her through basic maneuvers forward, back, side to side. She made mistakes. Once, she overcorrected and the Black Hawk dipped hard to the left, nearly clipping the ground. Her heart leapt into her throat, but she forced herself to steady it. Daniels didn't take the controls. He just said calmly, "Fix it." And she did. By the end of the session, sweat drenched her uniform. Her hands ached from gripping the controls so tightly. Her body felt like it had been wrung dry. But when she brought the Black Hawk down for a landing, gentle, smooth, clean something, inside her shifted. For years, people had laughed when she said she would fly one of these. Even she had sometimes doubted it. But now, she had done it. The impossible was no longer a dream. It was real. The rotors slowed, the engines winding down. Silence filled the cockpit. Daniels pulled off his sunglasses and looked at her directly. For the first time, "You've got potential, Martinez. Rough edges, sure, but potential." He paused, then added, "Don't waste it." She nodded, too exhausted and overwhelmed to speak. Outside, the trainees waited. Some clapped politely. Others scowled, muttering under their breath. She didn't care. For once, their opinions didn't matter. Because Elena Martinez had flown a Black Hawk, and no amount of doubt, no laugh, no sneer, no whispered insult could ever take that away from her. The day after her first successful Black Hawk flight, Elena expected something to change. She thought the whispers would die down, that the mocking would soften, that maybe, just maybe, she had earned the respect she'd been fighting for since her first day in uniform. But it didn't happen. If anything, the doubts grew louder. In the mess hall, recruits clustered at tables, voices low but pointed. "She just got lucky," one said. "Daniels probably held her hand the whole way." Another laughed. "Yeah, wait till she actually has to do something hard." She freeze. Elena sat alone at the edge of the room, tray of food untouched. She kept her face calm, but inside, every word stung. She wanted to shout at them, to remind them that they hadn't even touched the controls yet, while she had lifted thousands of pounds of steel into the air. But she knew shouting wouldn't change their minds. Only flying would. Still, the loneliness weighed on her. She carried it back to the barracks, where conversations hushed when she walked in. She carried it into the classrooms, where instructors sometimes raised eyebrows at her answers, as if waiting for her to slip. Even in the rare moments when someone offered a compliment, it felt loaded, like they were saying, "Good for you. But don't get ahead of yourself." Daniels noticed it. During one session, he caught her lingering after the others had left. She stood by the Black Hawk, helmet in her hands, staring at the machine as if trying to will herself into it. "You did fine yesterday," he said. She didn't look up. "I don't think so." "Who's they?" "Everyone," she said bitterly. "The recruits. Some of the instructors. Half the time, I'm not sure if even you think I can do this." Daniels studied her for a long moment. Then he shrugged. "Does it matter?" She frowned. "Of course it matters." "No," he said firmly. "It doesn't. You think anyone out there in combat is going to care what the peanut gallery thought of you in training? The only thing that matters is whether you can keep that bird in the air when lives are on the line. Everything else is noise." Elena wanted to believe him. But late at night, when the barracks were dark and the world was quiet, the noise was all she could hear. "They're right. You're small. You're not strong enough. You don't belong here." The voice came from inside her now, not just outside. And that was harder to silence. So she fought it the only way she knew how, by working harder. She doubled her runs, pounding the pavement before dawn, until her legs burned and her lungs screamed. She pushed through extra weight sessions, building muscle she had never thought possible. She volunteered for every training scenario, even the ones no one else wanted. If a helicopter simulator was open, she was in it. If a manual was within reach, she studied it. Her body carried bruises, her mind carried exhaustion, but she wore both like armor. And yet, no matter how much she did, the doubts clung to her. One afternoon, during a maintenance class, an instructor asked a question about fuel systems. Elena raised her hand and answered perfectly, outlining the process step by step. Instead of praise, the instructor smirked. "You memorized that from a book, didn't you? Let's see how well you do under pressure when things start breaking down in the air." The class laughed. Elena's cheeks burned. She bit her tongue, forcing herself not to snap back. But later, when she was alone, she replayed the moment over and over. It didn't matter how much she knew. The assumption was always that she wasn't ready, wasn't real, wasn't enough. The jealousy was real, too. A few recruits who had once dismissed her began to notice that her scores outpaced theirs. Instead of respect, it bred resentment. "She's trying to make us look bad," one muttered. Another sneered. "Of course she gets attention. Instructors always go easier on women." That cut deepest of all. Elena knew she wasn't getting any special treatment, if anything. She felt the opposite, but the accusation made her grind her teeth. If they thought her progress was favoritism, then she'd just have to work twice as hard, until even they couldn't deny it. But the harder she worked, the heavier the weight became. There were nights when she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, and wondered if she was breaking herself for nothing. Maybe they were right. Maybe she would never get a pilot's slot. Maybe all her preparation, all her sacrifices, were just wasted energy. The loneliness gnawed at her. She didn't have friends here. Not really. Most recruits formed bonds over shared struggles, laughing during meals, joking during drills, writing letters home together. Elena kept to herself, her notebooks and manuals her only companions. One evening, after another grueling day, she found herself sitting on the steps outside the barracks, staring up at the desert stars. The night air was cool, the silence broken only by the distant hum of generators. She thought of home, her mother's quiet encouragement, her father's dismissive laughter, her classmates' mocking voices. She thought of the promise she had made to herself as a child, lying on the roof of her house, watching helicopters thunder across the sky. And she whispered, just loud enough for herself to hear, "I can fly it." The words steadied her. The doubts didn't vanish. They never would. But in that moment, she realized something important. Doubt wasn't her enemy. It was her weight. And like any weight, she could lift it, carry it, build strength from it. The more they doubted her, the stronger she would become. From then on, she stopped waiting for the whispers to fade. She stopped hoping for validation. She accepted the doubt, strapped it on like a rucksack, and carried it with her everywhere she went. Every insult became fuel. Every sneer became motivation. Every laugh became another rep, another lap, another late-night study session. She didn't need them to believe in her. She only needed the Black Hawk to believe in her hands when the time came. And deep down, she knew the time was coming. The Arizona sun had barely begun its climb when the alarm shattered the quiet of the training compound. A sharp, metallic siren wailed through the air, followed by the bark of radios snapping to life. Soldiers sprinted from the barracks, boots pounding against the hard earth. Elena froze mid-step, her morning run forgotten, as instructors shouted orders across the yard. Something was wrong. Training alarms were familiar, but this wasn't routine. The urgency in their voices cut sharper than any drill. Medical evacuation. Black Hawk needed immediately. A voice bellowed from the operations tent. A chill ran down Elena's spine. She jogged toward the commotion, weaving through recruits clustering nervously in groups. The word spread like wildfire. A convoy running a desert exercise had gone wrong. An armored vehicle had rolled in rough terrain. Several soldiers were injured. The location was remote, and ground transport would take too long. The only way to reach them in time was by air. A Black Hawk was prepped on the flight line, engines already whining to life. But then the news rippled through the crowd. The assigned pilot was down sudden illness, too severe to fly. Murmurs rose. Faces turned anxious. Another pilot hadn't arrived yet. Time was slipping away. Daniels stood at the center, jaw clenched. Radio pressed to his ear. "We've got minutes, not hours," he snapped. "If those men don't get evac soon, we'll be recovering bodies, not saving them." The recruits shifted uneasily. No one volunteered. Most hadn't even touched the controls of a real Black Hawk yet. The machine towered on the flight line like a restless beast, rotors spinning faster, waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to take hold. Elena felt her pulse pounding in her throat. Every part of her screamed to move, but the weight of eyes, of expectations, of doubts held her back. She heard the voices again. She's not ready. She freeze. She crash. But another voice rose inside her, stronger than the rest. The one that had carried her through bruises, whispers, and endless nights of self-doubt. You said it your whole life. You promised yourself. Say it now. She stepped forward. I can fly it. The words cut through the chaos, sharp and clear. Silence fell. Dozens of eyes turned to her, wide with disbelief. Some recruits scoffed openly. One muttered, "She's insane." Another laughed. "This isn't a simulator, Martinez. Sit down before you kill somebody." Daniel's gaze locked on her. For a moment, he said nothing, searching her face. She forced herself not to look away. "I can fly it," she repeated, louder this time. Her voice trembled at the edges, but the core was steady. The weight of the moment pressed down on her chest. She wasn't just speaking to Daniels, or the recruits, or even the men waiting for rescue in the desert. She was speaking to every doubt she had ever carried, every sneer she had ever endured. Daniels exhaled slowly. "You think you're ready?" "I know I am." The recruits erupted with protests. "She's never flown solo. This is suicide." "Sir, you can't seriously." Daniels silenced them with a glare. He turned back to Elena. "If you take that bird up, there's no safety net, no simulation. Real people are depending on you. If you screw this up, men die? Understand?" Elena's stomach clenched. Her mind flashed with images rotors, spinning out of control, metal colliding with sand, flames rising. But beneath the fear burned something fiercer, the certainty that she could do this. "I understand," she said. For a long moment, Daniels stared at her. Then, with a nod that was almost imperceptible, he jerked his thumb toward the helicopter. "Then saddle up." The crowd exploded again, some with disbelief, some with outrage. Elena ignored them. Her legs carried her forward, fast but steady, toward the waiting Black Hawk. The roar of its engines drowned everything else out. Climbing inside, she strapped in with shaking hands. The controls felt heavier than ever before, not in weight, but in responsibility. This wasn't practice. This wasn't about proving herself to doubters. This was life and death. Daniels climbed into the co-pilot's seat beside her. His voice was calm, steady. "You called it. Now prove it." Her hands hovered over the controls, trembling. She closed her eyes for 1 second, inhaled, and whispered under her breath, I can fly it. Then she acted. The checklist flowed from her lips like second nature. Systems green, fuel checked, rotors spinning full. The Black Hawk trembled, straining against the earth. She eased the collective. The helicopter lifted, dust exploding in two. A storm beneath them. Recruits shielded their faces below as the Black Hawk climbed, its thundering blades carrying Elena into the sky. For a heartbeat, fear nearly overwhelmed her. Every vibration, every tilt of the machine felt magnified, threatening to spiral out of control. But she gritted her teeth, adjusted with the pedals, and found the balance point. Daniel's voice cut in over the headset. Good, now get us moving. We're burning daylight. Elena pushed the cyclic forward. The Black Hawk surged ahead, slicing through the desert air. The base shrank behind them, the horizon opening wide. Her heart raced, but her hands steadied. She remembered every hour in the simulator, every correction from Daniels, every late-night whisper to herself. It all came together now, flowing through her like instinct. The radio crackled. A panicked voice filled the cabin. Convoy Alpha to command status critical. 2 soldiers bleeding out. Repeat, 2 critical. ETA on evac? Elena tightened. Her grip. Her voice joined the combs, calm despite the storm in her chest. Evac inbound. Hold tight. We're coming for you. Daniels shot her a glance, a flicker of approval crossing his face. They thundered over the desert, the Black Hawk roaring like it was alive in her hands. Below, sand dunes rolled endlessly, the sun blazing off the earth. Time blurred. Every second mattered. Finally, the wreck came into view, an armored vehicle overturned, smoke curling from its side, soldiers waving desperately from the ground. Medics knelt beside the wounded, urgency etched on their faces. Elena's pulse spiked. This was the hardest part. The landing zone was narrow rocky terrain, scattered debris, not much room to maneuver. A bad angle, and the rotors would shred against stone. Daniel spoke low. You can do this. Take it slow. Trust the bird. Her throat tightened. This was the moment. All the doubt, all the whispers, all the years came to this single decision. I can fly it, she whispered. Hands steady, she guided the Black Hawk down. Dust swirled violently as the rotors kicked up, obscuring her vision. The ground wavered. She adjusted, fighting the drift, countering with delicate touches on the pedals and cyclic. The helicopter hovered, then eased lower, lower, until thump the skids touched earth. She exhaled, a rush of relief flooding her chest. They were down, safe. The crew leapt into action, medics loading the injured aboard. Soldiers shouted over the roar, securing gear and strapping stretchers. Elena kept the helicopter steady, every muscle taut, until finally Daniels gave the word. Go. Get us out. She lifted again, smooth and clean, carrying the wounded away from danger. The radio crackled once more. Convoy Alpha copy evac. God bless you, pilot. Elena's throat tightened. She didn't dare smile yet. There was still distance to cover, lives in her hands, but inside, something broke open. For the first time, the words weren't a promise or a defense or a whisper in the dark. They were real. She could fly it. And now, everyone knew it. The desert rescue had proven Elena could fly under pressure. But her greatest challenge came weeks later inside the heart of the city, where the horizon wasn't sand and sky, but steel and glass. The call came during a tense training deployment in an American metropolis. A joint exercise had spiraled into chaos when a simulated riot turned unexpectedly violent. Explosives detonated, fires spread, and chaos erupted across several city blocks. Soldiers and civilians were trapped on the roof of a burning high-rise. Ground routes were blocked, and flames threatened to consume the upper floors. Command marked. The order: Black Hawk needed for rooftop extraction. It was the kind of mission that demanded surgical precision. The rooftop was barely larger than a tennis court, surrounded by antennas and billboards, with swirling smoke cutting visibility. One wrong tilt of the rotors could shear the aircraft into the building. Even seasoned pilots hesitated at the thought, but fate had a cruel sense of timing. The unit's senior pilot was grounded with injuries from the earlier exercise. Another was already airborne on a different mission. That left a gap, one that seemed impossible to fill. Inside the command tent, officers debated furiously. Every minute lost was another minute that the trapped soldiers and civilians risked, suffocating or burning alive. "We don't have time to wait for another bird." Daniel slammed his fist against the table. "We need someone who can get in." "There now." A chilling silence followed. The words hung heavy in the air. Everyone knew what that meant. Elena Martinez stood near the back, listening, her heart hammering. Smoke billowed in the distance outside the tent, marking the inferno. They were racing against. Her palms were slick, her throat dry, but the decision was already forming inside her like a spark-catching flame. She stepped forward. "I can fly it." The room froze. Heads turned. For a split second, the scene mirrored that day on the desert. Flight line, when she had volunteered for the medevac mission. Only this time, the stakes were higher, the risk sharper, the doubts heavier. A lieutenant barked a laugh. "Are you insane? That landing zone's a coffin. You'll kill yourself, and..." Everyone waiting for rescue. Another muttered, "She got lucky once." "Don't gamble lives on luck." Elena's jaw tightened. Her voice was steady, but her chest trembled with adrenaline. "This isn't luck. I trained for this. I know I can do it." Daniel's eyes locked on hers. He saw the fire there, the same one that had carried her through every obstacle. Slowly, he nodded. "Give her the bird." The protests rose again, louder this time. But Daniel shut them down with a bark. "You've got a better option?" "No." "Then get out of her way." Moments later, Elena was sprinting across the tarmac, helmet under her arm, the thunder of the Black Hawk's rotors vibrating through the ground. She vaulted inside, strapped in, and powered through the preflight checks. The helicopter rose into the air, blades slicing against the smoke-filled sky. "Martinez," Daniel's voice came through the headset, calm but firm. "This one's on you. Trust yourself. Trust the bird." She exhaled, hands firm on the controls. "Roger that." The city spread below her like a labyrinth of concrete and chaos. Sirens wailed, smoke spiraled upward, and flames licked the edges of buildings. The rooftop came into view, a narrow rectangle, crammed with terrified faces. Civilians waved frantically. Soldiers tried to keep order, but panic was winning. Elena's pulse spiked. The rooftop was smaller than it had looked in the photos. Barely enough space to fit the skids. On three sides, the building dropped into dizzying nothingness. On the fourth, antennas jutted like spears, ready to shred the rotors if she miscalculated. She heard the old whispers in her mind. Too risky, too dangerous. She's not ready. She'll freeze. She gritted her teeth. "No, I can do this." Smoke buffeted the cockpit, making visibility patchy. She adjusted altitude, nudging the Black Hawk forward. The rotors churned the smoke into violent spirals, tossing dust and debris into the air. "Easy," Daniels coached. "Small corrections. Keep your tail clear of the edge." Her grip was firm but flexible, guiding the bird with feather-light precision. The helicopter hovered. Above the rooftop, downwash whipping people's clothes and scattering debris. Civilians ducked, shielding their faces. Soldiers waved her down, signaling frantically. Elena eased the collective, dropping altitude inch by inch. Every muscle in her body was taut, her eyes darting between the gauges and the rooftop. One wrong move, one overcorrection, and the rotors would strike steel, ending everything. Sweat stung her eyes. She blinked hard, forcing focus. 5 feet. 4. 3. The skids touched down with a jolt. Cheers erupted from the rooftop. Soldiers rushed civilians forward, loading them onto the Black Hawk as quickly as possible. Medics scrambled aboard with the wounded. The aircraft groaned under the shifting weight, but Elena kept it steady, balancing against the rooftops. Uneven surface. Half loaded. A soldier shouted. Smoke thickened, swirling hotter, angrier, as the fire raged beneath them. Elena's throat burned from the acrid air, seeping into the cabin. She glanced sideways. Flames were beginning to lick higher up the building. Time was vanishing fast. Move, move, move. A sergeant bellowed, shoving civilians inside. Finally, the last soldier gave the thumbs up. We're full. Go, go, go. Elena didn't wait. She pulled on the collective. The Black Hawk lurched upward, groaning under the heavy load, but she coaxed it gently higher, steady as stone. The rooftop dropped away. Below, the building groaned and shuddered, flames consuming its upper floors. Just seconds after liftoff, a section of the roof collapsed in a roar of sparks and smoke. Gasps filled the cabin. If they had been any later, the evacuees would have been gone. Elena didn't allow herself relief yet. They were still in hostile skies. Smoke made navigation treacherous. Winds shifted unpredictably between the high-rises, and the overloaded helicopter strained against its own weight. She threaded the Black Hawk between towers, clearing obstacles by mere feet, her focus absolute. Every flick of her wrist, every press of the pedals mattered. The city blurred past, glass and fire reflecting off the cockpit. Finally, the smoke thinned. The landing zone appeared ahead, a clear stretch on the edge of the city, marked with flares. Elena guided the bird down, smooth despite the weight, and touched skids to earth. As the rotors slowed, the rescued civilians stumbled out, some collapsing in relief, others weeping openly. Soldiers clapped each other on the back, shouting praise. Inside the cockpit, Elena sat frozen for a moment, her hands trembling now that the mission was complete. She exhaled a shaky breath, chest tight with the release of pressure. Daniels glanced at her, his expression unreadable for a long minute. Then, with a rare softness, he said, "You just pulled off one of the hardest landings I've ever seen." Elena swallowed hard, emotions rising thick in her throat. She didn't trust herself to speak, so she just nodded. Behind them, the rescued soldiers and civilians began chanting. It started small, then grew, echoing across the landing zone. Pilot, pilot, pilot. For the first time, no one mocked her. No one doubted her. They saw her not as the girl who dared to dream, but as the woman who had flown into fire and carried lives out of it. Elena Martinez had not just landed a Black Hawk on a rooftop. She had landed herself in history. The roar of the rotors faded into the night, leaving behind an almost sacred stillness on the landing zone. Soldiers and civilians were still streaming out of the Black Hawk, coughing from the smoke, clutching each other in disbelief. Some fell to their knees, kissing the ground. Others wept openly, relief flooding through their exhausted bodies. Elena Martinez remained in the cockpit, her gloved hands still resting on the controls. Her knuckles were white, her pulse hammering in her throat. For nearly an hour, she had been one with the machine, her breath synced with the engine, her heartbeat tethered to the blades. Now, as the helicopter sat cooling on the asphalt, she felt the weight of it all crash onto her shoulders. She closed her eyes for a brief second. It's over. They're safe. The canopy door opened, and Sergeant Collins leaned inside, his face streaked with soot. For years, he had been one of her most vocal skeptics, dismissing her as someone who wanted glory without the grit. Tonight, though, his expression was different. His voice was low, almost reverent. "Martinez," he said, shaking his head. I don't know how the hell you did it." She didn't answer. She wasn't sure she could. Words felt clumsy compared to the intensity of what had just happened. Instead, she gave a small nod, unbuckled her harness, and stepped down onto the ground. As her boots touched the asphalt, something strange happened. The men and women who had once laughed at her gathered in silence. Not the smirking, condescending silence of before, but something heavier. Something that carried weight. Their eyes tracked her every step. Lieutenant Harris, the same man who had called her insane for volunteering, walked up slowly. His usual swagger was gone. He extended his hand firm, deliberate. Elena hesitated before clasping it. His grip was tight, as if he wanted to make sure she understood what he couldn't say aloud. "You didn't just fly that bird," Harris admitted. "You brought every single one of them back. That was damn near impossible." For a moment, Elena thought back to all the time she'd been dismissed, all the whispers behind her back. She's not ready. She's not strong enough. It's a man's game. Tonight, those words dissolved in the smoke of a rooftop she had conquered. But she didn't gloat. She didn't say, "I told you so." She simply nodded again and moved past him, her silence more powerful than any boast could ever be. The debriefing hours. Later, Elena sat in the dimly lit debriefing room. Her flight suit was still stained with sweat and soot, her hair matted under the helmet she hadn't yet put down. Commanders gathered at the table, voices low and serious. Colonel Reeves, a man known for his uncompromising standards, looked across at her. "Martinez," he began, his tone measured. "That landing was one of the finest displays of precision piloting I've ever witnessed. You risked everything, and you saved 32 lives tonight." He leaned back, studying her. "Do you realize what you've just done?" Elena shifted in her seat, unsure how to respond. In her mind, she hadn't thought of glory or legacy. She had only thought of the civilians waving desperately from that rooftop, of the soldiers depending on her hands to guide them out of hell. "I just did my job, sir," she said quietly. Reeves gave a rare smile. "No, Lieutenant, you redefined it." The recognition word of the rooftop rescue spread faster than wildfire. By dawn, local news channels carried grainy footage shot by civilians from nearby buildings. The sight of the Black Hawk threading between skyscrapers and settling onto a rooftop in the middle of chaos captivated the country. Commentators called it a miracle landing. Analysts praised her nerves of steel, but the most important reaction came from within her own ranks. Soldiers who had once mocked her now spoke of her with reverence. Collins, once her loudest critic, told younger recruits, "You want to know what courage looks like? Watch Martinez fly." In the mess hall the next morning, conversation died. When she walked in, dozens of eyes turned toward her. For a moment, Elena braced for the old whispers. But instead, the room erupted into applause. Loud, unrestrained, genuine. Soldiers banged their trays against tables, chanting her name. "Martinez! Martinez! Martinez!" Her cheeks flushed. She tried to wave them off, but the chant only grew louder, echoing through the room. Finally, she sat down quietly with her meal, letting their respect wash over her. She didn't need to speak. The silence she kept had become her trademark, stronger than any speech she could give. The conversation with Daniels later that day. Captain Daniels found her sitting alone outside, watching the sky. The city was quieter now, but the scars of the night before were still visible, columns of smoke rising in the distance. The hum of helicopters ferrying supplies. Daniels sat beside her, handing over a cup of coffee. "You know," he said, I had pilots with twice your years of experience tell me they wouldn't touch that mission with a 10-foot pole. Elena sipped the coffee, staring out at the horizon. Why did you trust me, sir? She asked softly. Daniels chuckled. Because when you said, I can fly it, you weren't boasting. You weren't looking for attention. You were stating a fact. And I figured the kind of person who can say that with your eyes, without flinching, is the kind of person who can actually do it. For the first time since the mission, Elena allowed herself a small smile. The Legacy Begins weeks turned into months, and the rooftop landing became part of the unit's lore. New recruits heard the story during orientation. Veterans told it around. Campfires, voices hushed with respect. Doc and Elena? She kept flying. She trained harder, mentored younger pilots, and carried herself with the same quiet determination that had brought her here. She never let the praise inflate her, never chased medals or headlines. But the soldiers who had been on that rooftop carried a different story. To them, she wasn't just a pilot, she was the reason they were alive. Some wrote letters to her. Family. Others brought their children to meet her during family days, pointing proudly, "That's the one who saved me." One evening, months later, a young private approached her shyly after training. "Ma'am," he said, "I heard the rooftop story. I want to be a pilot too. Think I could?" Elena looked at him, remembering her younger self staring at helicopters in the sky, mocked for dreaming. She smiled. "If you're willing to work harder than anyone else, yes, you can." The silent triumph. The rooftop landing earned Elena commendations, but the true reward wasn't the medals or the speeches. It was the silence in the command room when she returned, not of mockery, but of awe. The silence in the mess hall before the applause erupted. The silence in the eyes of her comrades, who no longer doubted but believed. She never needed to remind them of the words they once said. She never needed to gloat. Her actions had spoken in the language of rotors and steel, in the scream of fire and the calm of precision. And in that silence, Elena Martinez found the respect she had chased her entire life. Not the fragile respect of being tolerated, but the unshakable respect of being proven. The girl who once whispered, "I can fly." It had grown into the woman who did, and no one, not ever again, dared to question her.